Hello, welcome back to Urban X-Files. My name is Keith, and today's scary story is something that many of you will be terrified of. And this is a case of a giant spider. Now, this creepy tale has been found all over the internet for the past 30 odd years. And for some reason it was sort of not really reported in the UK or in any of like other Western places. America, it wasn't really published there. But this seems to have been an incident that was caused by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. And this goes back to the 1990s, when police in Russia or the Ukraine even found a residence in a block of flats that was lying dead on the floor of one of the elevators. It is said that the man had been lying there lifeless and had some nasty bruises on his neck. And when he went into the autopsy, the coroner had said that the man had died through shock and loss of blood, as he'd had about 60% of the blood volume removed out of his body. Now, if the victim was shot or stabbed, you would think, okay, he lost blood through that. But the strange thing is, when he was found in the elevator, there was no evidence of any spilled blood. There were no blood stains. It was literally as if someone had come, bit the guy's neck and drank his blood. Now, a little while later, the news story was still circulating, but things had sort of calmed down and people had got back to their everyday lives. And in the following month, the police had once again been called out to this same block of flats, but this time because there was a young 13-year-old girl that had been trapped in the same elevator. People had heard the girl's screams, so they reported it to the police. So a short while later, police arrive, as do the fire service, and they managed to release the lift that was stuck between floors 5 and 6. So when they managed to get the lift back down to the ground level, they entered the lift and found that the 13-year-old girl had died. No explanation. Yet she was found lying on the floor, and she also had 2 puncture marks in her neck and one on the side of her chest. Yet the same results come back from the coroner, that she died through shock and loss of blood with no blood spillage. So, as you can imagine, things started to get very spooky, and the residents around the Ukraine began to talk of a vampire that was attacking people in this certain block of flats. Many people began to not use the elevator for fear of being the next victim to this vampire that was attacking the residents of the apartment block. Now, many of the police attempted to play down these mysterious deaths as just coincidence. A former KGB minister who had said that the girl had probably died after injecting heroin. Now, this was quickly quashed because the girl's family was adamant that the young girl was not involved with any drugs whatsoever, and threatened to sue the minister. Now, the only option left was that the police had said, we will have to spend time in this apartment block. So they sent police to have a presence at this block. So they were stationed various parts. There was even a van that was kept in the car park that would act as the police base. So the police would take turns of patrolling the apartment and speaking to its residents, and they were trying to get to the bottom of this strange but alarming matter. The next thing they decided to do was to have a duo of police officers taking turns riding the same lift. They took in turns swapping partners to take a ride in this same lift. Now, a couple of days had gone by with no incidents to report, and it was only on the third or fourth day that the lift was travelling upwards, and it suddenly stopped between the fifth and the sixth floor. Then, to make matters worse, as this stopped halfway between floors, the lights in the lift were dark. To make matters worse, one of the policemen was suffering from a set of phobias that would cause him great upset. Fear of the dark was one of them. Fear of confined spaces, and fear of creepy crawlies. The two men that were trapped waited apprehensively, wondering when this vampire was going to emerge to drain the blood like he had done his previous victims. So, nothing happened for a few minutes, and all was silent, when they heard something rustling at the top of the elevator above the hatch that opened out to the ropes and mechanics of the elevator. So the police had turned on their torches as the lights had gone, and they shined their torch into this crevice. And as they did, one of the policemen noticed that there was something moving where this hatch was. And as he shone his torch into the hatch, he noticed something which absolutely terrified him. There was the face of something that was looking back through that hole that made the detective's blood run cold. There was a big, black, hairy head about the size of a little melon, and it had a bunch of black, shining, hypnotic eyes that were the size of strawberries, and they all seemed to peer down at the detective, who was looking up in this hatch, terrified, beyond scared. So the detective slowly got his gun, armed himself, and raised his gun with his torch towards this thing with many eyes. He said to his colleague, "What the hell is it?" And the terrified police officer was unable to give an answer. Now, the boss in charge was the leading detective who was in there, had ordered his colleague to turn off his torch. So the police officer had reluctantly decided to argue against this and said, "No disrespect, sir, but there's no way I'm taking my torch and my gun away from that thing." So the detective then said to stay still and stay calm, and he will turn off his torch, as whatever this thing was did not like bright light. So there stood the two officers staring with this creature with 8 eyes. Then, in a panic, the detective who had the torch shining on this monster dropped it through panic, and it hit the floor and smashed. As this happened, this creature with lightning agility had opened the hatch and somehow come down and was over this police officer. And the policeman was screaming hysterically as this alien creature, what looked like it belonged in a whole other planet. His body was the size of a small dog. It had 8 hairy legs, and each of its legs were nearly 4 feet long. So you can imagine how big this creature was. The insect's mouth parts then proceeded to sink its teeth into the policeman's body, and the other officer sat and watched in utter terror as this creature drained the blood of his colleague. He said that he could see the body of this creature fill with his partner's blood. So the terrified police officer had to act fast. He took aim and he fired a shot at the spider. The shot missed, so he fired another shot, and this managed to take off one of its legs, and the bullet had also ricocheted off and managed to knock his torch out of his hand. So he fired again blindly, and it hit something which caused an almighty screech. He radioed down to his officers on the floor, and they managed to get the lift started back up again, and the lights in the lift turned on. As the lights come on, the police was sat in the corner, cowering away, not moving, through fear of this spider making him his next victim. He could see that this huge spider was no normal sized spider. It was something you would see off a horror film or from an alien or a planet like we discussed before. He didn't know what to do. Then he seen his colleague just drop to the floor as the spider scuttled back up to this hatch and made its way out of sight of the police officer. The lift was then made to go down to the ground floor, where the other police colleagues and fire and rescue were waiting apprehensively to see what had gone on. So when his police colleagues and the firemen had opened the lift doors, they found the dead policeman, whose face was etched with fear, and his body was bruised with puncture marks in various places. And there, on the floor, in the corner, was the police sergeant, terrified in a pool of pee. And next to the terrified officer was something that was over 3 foot long and was twitching nervously on the floor. What this thing was one of the legs of the spider that had been shot as the policeman took aim and fired away at this beast. It twitched and twitched, and then the policeman, who was sat in the corner, discussed and shared his story. The Russian authorities had done their very best to hush this incident, but as with all crazy stories, news was flooded via the internet, and a version had also appeared in various other newspapers throughout the world. Now, it was claimed that this giant spider had been some deformed mutation from the Chernobyl nuclear disaster some years before. So the Russian army was called in, and the troops had found the lair of this creature, and they found that the spider had laid hundreds of eggs in a weird cocoon at the top of the elevator shaft. These eggs and spider had to be torched and destroyed, and it says that you could hear the screams of the spider on the floor down below as the flames destroyed any evidence that was left of this giant creature. So what do you think? Do you think that there is some truth to this story? If you don't believe me, feel free to check out the internet and find out the Ukrainian giant spider's secrets for yourself. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this crazy story. Take care and see you all in the next video. Peace.